Something I've seen come up in the comments here and there since the release of the new monster manual is the notion that a few spells, most notably those that target humanoids like Charm and Hold Person, have become significantly weaker or stealth nerfed, since quite a few creatures that used to be classified as humanoids, like bugbears and hobgoblins, are no longer classified as such, and are now instead considered to be fey. Now, despite seeing this come up in occasional comments, I also have not seen this being discussed in any major way, though I totally could have just missed it. In any case, I thought this would be an interesting and valuable discussion to have to figure out exactly what's changed with all of the spells as a result of some of the monster updates. So, step 1 of this process involved checking every creature in the 2024 monster manual and comparing it against their 2014 selves. This was only the beginning of what would become an incredibly painstaking and time-consuming task, as you will soon see. So if you want to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to help support me, it's free and it helps a ton. Thanks a lot. Anyway, from here we can see that indeed quite a few creatures have had their typing changed. 62 monsters in total, which is not insignificant. It's like 12% of the entire book, so that somehow feels simultaneously like a big change, but also not that crazy either. The big thing to note here is that of those 62 creatures, the largest proportion that had their typing shifted was in fact humanoids. We lost 41 of them between the 2014 and 2024 monster manuals. That only tells part of the story though, as despite losing 41, a few were added, specifically 11, which means that the net difference though is still negative. So we are down a total of 30 humanoids between the two books. Other notable dips include losing 11 beasts and 9 fiends, but on the flip side, we had some big gains too. We got 11 aberrations, 13 celestials, and 15 fae, among some other smaller gains. So with all of that data gathered, I wanted to know what exactly it meant as far as spell effectiveness goes. But the thing is, I didn't just want to look at 2024 spells for this, since it seems like most people are playing at least in some form of hybrid. So I took a deep breath and looked through every single one of the 914 spells in the game, even the ones that have been updated with the new player's handbook and their legacy equivalents, because I wanted to make sure that there were no subtle changes that impacted creature type effectiveness. And it's good that I did, because plenty did change. I'll also state quickly that it is entirely possible that I missed a couple spells here and there. I don't think that I did, but after reading spell after spell for hours on end, there's only so much that my feeble mind can still process. As we can see here, I've broken down each creature type with the spells that have some kind of impact to them and listed what that effect is. For example, Banishment was changed in the 2024 rules, and now instead of the DM needing to know what plane of existence the creature originated from, if the creature is just part of a specific creature type, they don't return anymore when the spell ends. We can see this on the first line here under Aberrations, where Banishment is listed and the spell effect is doesn't return. I took a few liberties with some of the language on this, so forgive me. Something that is interesting to note here is that there are no spells, at least none that I noticed, that specifically affect dragons, giants, or monstrosities. So make of that what you will, I just thought it was an interesting data point. It does make me wonder though if that was some kind of unintentional omission, or if the team has specifically chosen to not create spells that have any impact on those creatures. Anyway, the important thing we were looking at here was humanoids, and the impact that creature type changes have had on these spells. We can see that there are 14 spells that do something specific when they are targeted against a humanoid. We've got Animate Dead, Calm Emotions, Ceremony, Charm Person, Crown of Madness, Dominate Person, Fast Friends, Finger of Death, Friends, Hold Person, Magic Jar, Reincarnate, and Simulacrum. It is worth clarifying though that it's not that all of these spells only affect humanoids, though some like Hold Person do. Some of these spells, like Finger of Death for example, still work regardless of the creature type, it's just that humanoids will respawn as a zombie, which is not true if the spell was cast on an ooze for example. So the natural question then becomes, how much quote-unquote worse are these spells now that we have lost like half of our humanoids between monster manuals? This is a very difficult question to answer in objective terms, since the value of any of these spells is almost entirely dependent on the type of campaign that you are playing in. If your world features no or very few humanoids, then there's no difference to you here at all, since you couldn't likely be using many of these spells anyway. Now, even if we might be able to come to a definitive conclusion on that end, I think the reality is that for most groups, the majority of their early level encounters do or did feature creatures that used to be considered humanoids. Things like kobolds, bullywugs, goblins, troglodytes, gnolls, hobgoblins, bugbears, lizardfolk, and were creatures. These, undoubtedly, were making up a very high proportion of low-level encounters, and likely still will given the sheer quantity of officially published modules that heavily featured them. But now, those 14 spells I mentioned earlier will have no or at least a lesser impact on them. So, does this actually matter? Maybe? The reality is that you weren't casting Finger of Death or Magic Jar or Simulacrum or Reincarnate or Dominate Person on a goblin anyway, so in that sense, no, it probably doesn't matter. But I can definitely see a world where spells like Animate Dead lose a reasonable amount of their value, as your group slaying a horde of goblins or bugbears could have been great fodder for that spell in the past, and now just doesn't work on them anymore. And the same is true of other spells like Calm Emotions or Charm Person. These are super fun spells to use in the early game, especially as you might not always have the resource to resolve literally everything with violence, and you might need to find another alternative or creative solution to your problem. So again, in that sense, yeah, there might be a perceptible loss here. I can also see how a new player wanting to cast spells like this to just be told pretty often that it doesn't work since the target isn't a humanoid will probably turn them off these kind of spells for at least a little bit. But I gotta say, I am really glad to see that Crown of Madness is getting an indirect nerf though. That thing just really needed to be reined in. When it comes to most of the spells in the middle though, your Hold and Dominate Persons, Create Undead, and honestly even Animate Dead, despite what I said earlier, will still probably end up being okay. Yes, they will have fewer valid targets, but in a lot of cases, it's quite common to be engaging with creatures of plenty of different types by the time you've gained a few levels. I'll be clear that yes, I think there will be a perceived loss of value here for at least a few of these spells. Some people will feel that more than others depending on the campaign and the type of spells that they like to cast in the first place. But broadly speaking, I don't think this is going to end up being that significant of a deal. The biggest reason I feel that way is because, remember, we've only been looking at creatures from the 2014 and 2024 monster manuals. That's only one small part of the story. In preparation for this, I also dug through every single monster in the 2014 era, so no, not just the monster manual, but every adventure module and campaign setting that was officially published by Wizards of the Coast, and I took a look at how many creatures of each type there were. So no, this does not include any third-party content. If we take a look at humanoids specifically, we can see that in the 2014 era, there were a total of 763 of them. That's a lot. Considering that there were 2,658 monsters total, that's almost 30%. So now in 2024, there's 733. It's a drop, sure, but like, it's less than 1% total. It's basically nothing. There are still hundreds and hundreds of targets for a whole person, so we don't need to worry too much just yet. Now, I will also be clear that this is certainly one of those areas where statistics without context can be a little bit misleading. It's very easy to say that there was a drop of less than 1% in total humanoids, so it doesn't matter at all. But, like I mentioned earlier, many of the creatures that did have their type changed to something else were creatures that were extremely common in the level bands where these changes will be felt most. So shifting a goblin from humanoid to fey will likely have a disproportionate impact than changing some random humanoid NPC into a fiend or something along those lines. And shout out to the giant owl and giant elk for becoming celestials, y'all really earned it. I've left a link to all of the data in both the pinned comment and the video description in case anyone wants to check it out. A massive thank you to all of my patrons, but especially those in my Elderbrain tier. You guys are amazing. So yeah, check out some of my other videos and subscribe to the channel if you want to help me out, but otherwise, take care.